Hey monster fans, welcome to another video on this channel. We're going to be looking at horror films and why they're so important to us. Horror has been around for ages, and it seems to be on a steady rise. So let's take a deep dive into why horror is so everlasting. Horror films are generally cheap to make. I think that's the obvious and simple answer. This means that they don't have to sell as many tickets to make a profit, which studios love. It's a fair point, but I think there's something deeper than that. I think, in my opinion, there's a few factors that make horror films so important to the human consciousness. I think the fear of death, which horror explores greatly. It explores the way that death can happen in multiple ways and at random. In a way, horror films make us aware of our own mortality. What's strange about that is that if we fear death so much, why do we expose ourselves to these films? I think in a sense horror is a paradox because horror attracts us, but it gives us a pleasure and intrigue through these repulsive imagery. It should be something that drives us away, but yet it draws us in. I think that draw comes from horror's way of addressing our anxieties, whether they're personal, societal, or political. We can deal with them in the safe environment of a movie theater. It allows us to problem solve, prepare, and walk us through our anxieties. Shines a light on our fears, makes these things less scary. As we are exposed to horror, we can build a tolerance to those things that scare us. We develop a control, I think, because of that. Some horror films, speaking of our subconscious, are much like our dreams. This allows us to deal with the issues that we have a hard time dealing with directly. As humans, we all have our own individual and collective anxieties. That's why the horror film, in my opinion, seems to be very popular in times of social unease, war, disease, economic decline, and probably that's why it'll never go away. These things are part of our human experience, as negative as they are, but I think that's where horror comes from. We made these things, we made these films in order to deal with those. Ultimately, I think we can point to Aristotle's theory of catharsis. Aristotle is often brought up when talking about catharsis specifically, although many have criticized horror as causing an acceptance or imitation of violent behavior. I think that art, and especially horror films, should not be censored because experiencing a range of these events vicariously, I think it purges us of our desire to act them out in the real world. Ultimately, horror leaves us with a better feeling of the world that we live in because, as bad as it may seem, horror shows us things could be a lot worse.